like to call to order the planning the Planning Commission for December 3rd. If we could have our opening comments, please.
Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. For those at Century 2, copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available in the lobby. The Planning Commission's and the BZA's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning, subdivision, or variance application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the chairman may extend these times by up to 2 minutes. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please share your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the room or the GoToMeeting comments box. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission and the Board will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking, but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please provide your contact information to the Planning Department. The Planning Commission and the Board are interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as courteous and concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available from the planning staff. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct its own additional public hearings on these items. The decision of the BZA is final. Any appeal of a decision of the BZA is to district court.
Okay, before we get started on the agenda, just want to remind the commissioners that for those that are here, to remember to speak clearly into the microphone. And for those that are here virtually, make sure you unmute your microphone when you want to speak. The second thing I'd like to do is welcome Ann Fox in person to her to the commission meeting today. So with that, we'll move on to the first item of our agenda, and that would be the approval of our meeting minutes from November 19th, and it appears as though all were present for that meeting. So
Move for approval.
that was a motion by, I believe, Joe Johnson, and a second by David Foster. And David, do you have some questions and comments on the minutes?
Yeah, if you look at page 21 and 22, there's been some margins that cut off some of the text that was lost. And then I'm curious, were we not at the Reagan building for those proceedings? Then at the last minute, because of the COVID thing, we had to switch it.
Right. Yeah, that could very well be, yeah. Okay, you got those noted. Any other comments or questions on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Motion carries, 13?
I've got 11.
11?
You've got,
Yeah,
oh, you got 12, okay.
12-0.
12-0.
Okay. Moving on, we'll go to the consideration of the subdivision committee recommendations. First item up is subdivision 2020-00041, which is a final plat of North Gate 5th Edition. Is there anyone on the commission that would like to hear this item? Seeing none, is there anyone in Century 2 that would like to hear this item?
There's no comment.
Okay. Is there anyone virtually that would like to hear this item? Hearing none, we'll take that one on consent. Item 2.2, subdivision case 2020-00045, one-step final plat for L&M Estates addition. Is there anyone on the commission that would like to hear this item? Hearing none, is there anyone at Century 2 that would like to hear this item?
There's no comment from Century 2.
Thank you. Is there anyone virtually that would like to hear this item? Hearing none, we'll take that one on consent. We'll move along to 2.3, subdivision case 2020-00046, one-step final plat, Elder Farm Edition. Is there anyone on the commission that would like to hear this item? Hearing none. Is there anyone at Century 2 that would like to hear this item?
There's no comment from Century 2.
Thank you. Is there anyone virtually that would like to hear this item? Hearing none, we'll take that one by consent.
Chairman, I move to approve agenda items 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3.
I second.
A second.
Okay, the motion was made by Mr. Warren, sorry. I was trying to figure out who I was going to have second it. Mr. Warren made the motion, and I believe Mr. Florence had the second on that. So if there, are there any questions or discussion on the item? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Scott, how many commissioners do you have showing online?
Online, I can
Yeah.
tell you we have 12 total. I have Shane is online, I have Joe
Okay.
Johnson online, Cindy Miles online, and Mr. Florence online.
And it looks like Mr. Dool's online also,
And Mr. Dool, yep,
so that would be 5.
that's correct.
Okay.
Yep,
I guess it's McKay and Blick that are not here. Okay,
not here, that's right.
just wanted to make sure we had the proper number. Or Mr. Foster would remind us of that next time we go through the minutes. Moving on to the vacation items. We've got item 3.1, vacation 2020-00045. It's a vacation of a platted building setback, basically located at the 11,105 West Grant. Is there anyone on the commission that would like to hear this item? Hearing none. Is there anyone at Century 2 that would like to hear this item?
There's no comment from Century 2.
Thank you. Is there anyone virtually that would like to hear this item? Hearing none, we'll take that one on consent.
I move for approval of item 3.1.
Second.
The motion was made by Mr. Joe Johnson, second by Mr. Bill Johnson. Are there any questions or comments concerning this case, the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. We will hear item 4.1. Move on to item 4.2. It's a conditional use hearing for conditional 2020-00034. It's for an AT&T communications tower located at 625 East 14th Street North. Is there anyone on the commission that would like to hear this item?
Yeah, I do.
Mr. Hartman, we will hear this item. Moving on to item 4.3, conditional case 2020-00035. It's conditional use for vehicle sales in a limited commercial zoning located at the 3164 South Hillside. Is there anyone on the commission that would like to hear this item? Hearing none. Is there anyone at Century 2 that would like to hear this item?
There's no comment from Century 2.
Okay. Is there anyone virtually that would like to hear this item? Hearing none, we'll take item 4.3.
I move to approve item 4.3.
Second.
Been moved by Mr. Bill Johnson, second by Ms. Cindy Miles to approve this case. Are there any questions on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. If we could have the item 4.1 presented, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Philip Ziegenberger with Planning Staff. Conditional use 2020-33, the applicant is requesting a conditional use for a placement of a 235-foot wireless communications tower, a cell phone tower for AT&T, located approximately 1/2 mile south of East 71st Street South, which is Meadowlark Boulevard in Derby, and about a mile east of South Rock Road. This tower would be located on the very southwest portion of a property address 9803 West Meadowlark. You can see its location there. East 71st Street is basically right where the top black line is in our picture, and so you're a good 1/2 mile south of there. If you're familiar with Derby, another landmark you can do is the roundabout at James Street and High Park Drive. About northeast of that, several hundred feet, is where the tower will actually be located. The site is zoned RR rural residential. It's in unincorporated Sedgwick County, but it's also in the Derby urban area of influence. It's also within the Area D of the airport hazard zoning map. That classification allows for structures up to 300 feet, so there's no issue related to that. However, Section 3A2D of the Wireless Communication Master Plan for Sedgwick County limits the height of towers in the RR district to be approved by administrative permit to 120 feet. So if I were to say that again, if they had proposed a 120-foot tower or less, we could have done that administratively, and it would not have had to come through the conditional use process or a public hearing in order to do that. But because this tower is going to be 115 feet taller than that, it has to come through the conditional use process as the zoning code dictates. If you want to go to the next slide. The parcel of this tower is located on a 55-acre parcel owned by the applicant, which is primary agricultural land with structures associated with the use. As you see on the site plan here, the lease area for the wireless communication tower is located on the far south and west side of the property. It's a 60-foot by 60-foot size lease area with a 20-foot access, utility, and turnaround easement to the west. Access to the site, as you can see on the screen there, is from a 20-foot access easement that would come off of the roundabout where James Street meets Hyde Park Drive. This is in the city limits of Derby, and because of that, the access drive would require permission from the city of Derby as it traverses across part of their public street right-of-way. Go to the next slide. The applicant indicates that the tower will be a lattice structure tower. There's a 50-foot by 50-foot compound area within that lease area where the actual equipment will be located. You did receive an updated site plan that we received this week that shows that there will be a solid screening fence as opposed to chain link, which was the original submission, in addition to the adding of landscaping, as you can see on the screen, surrounding the compound area. So most of the staff report related to this section actually has changed because they now would be in compliance with the code regarding solid screening as well as additional landscaping. It is important to note, if you saw in the aerial image, that there are a considerable number of trees surrounding the site. There's kind of a hedgerow at the backyard of the houses, as well as a decent hedgerow located on the north side of the park, which is the south side. And you'll see these trees when you go through the site pictures. If you want to go to the next slide, the tower is meant, here's the elevation of it. You can see the height of the tower in relation to the landscaping and the equipment. Go to the next slide. The tower is meant to provide additional coverage to a 1/4 mile ring just south of Derby High School. It's a little hard to see, but the kind of the white block kind of towards the north side of that map there, that's Derby High School. You can see the yellow ring. This is provided by the applicant. So it's just south of the Derby High School in a residential area. The agent provided a notarized statement stating that an analysis of a possible co-location site was conducted and that none were available. Though this analysis was conducted, state law prohibits the possibility of co-location as a factor of evaluation when it comes to cell phone towers. So co-location means there's already a cell tower there, and you can just put additional facilities on that cell tower location. I'm going to go through, if you go to the next slide, KSA 66-2019 lists 18 prohibitions that we cannot consider when it comes to the evaluation of cell phone towers. We've broken it down to 5 of the most pertinent related to this case. What I have on the screen here is actually even more of a layman's term description of what's in your staff report here. The first one being, we cannot evaluate the demand or the quality of the applicant's wireless service in the area. We can't just say, well, we think your service is good enough, you don't need a cell phone tower. Second one is the propagation maps and the telecommunications study. Basically, we can't ask them to prove that this is the best solution for the area. The third one is the availability of other potential locations for the tower. This kind of what I was talking about before. We can't say, well, you could have the possibility of co-location of a tower, or you can look at another site for the tower instead. We have to take this application at the face value for what they submitted for evaluation. The fourth one is the technology used, including the ability to construct small cell facilities. Basically, we can't say there's a better way to do this. We think you need to do small cell technology or other types of technologies. Again, we have to take this application as it was submitted with face value. Fifth one being impacts on aviation beyond the FAA requirements. Basically, we have to require them to follow the FAA requirements and get all the necessary checks and balances done with them, and we can't go above and beyond what the FAA would require related to structures in navigable airspace. So there may be concerns, and there were some concerns at the Derby meeting last night of proximity to McConnell Air Force Base, things of that nature. Obviously, the airport hazard zone allows it to be this tall. We just say you have to comply with what the FAA asks of you, and as a commission, you cannot add any further restrictions related to that. One of the things that was brought up in the Derby meeting by their planner that I thought was pertinent, additional information that's not on the screen here, is it's actually a federal prohibition from the FCC, the Federal Communications, we'll just call it the FCC. We can't evaluate the possible impacts of the radio waves. Like you can say, well, we think that these are harmful, or what the impacts are going to be on the surrounding area. As long as that facility meets the requirements of the FCC regarding their transmission, that's considered good enough. So you can't go above and beyond and say, well, if it has to comply with those regulations, and if it complies, then there's nothing we as a or you as a commission can say has to be done in addition to that. So that's kind of the breakdown of the most applicable prohibitions that as a commission you can't take into an evaluation criteria regarding whether or not this is going to be permitted. Go to the next slide. We'll go to the zoning and the character of the area. The surrounding area is a mix of low-density residential. Properties to the north and the east are in Sedgwick County and zoned rural residential and are a mix of agricultural land with single-family uses. Most of the time there's a single-family home with large tracts of land used for agricultural ranching. Properties to the west and to the south are in the city limits of Derby. There's zone R1, single-family residential. Directly to the west is single-family homes, and directly to the south is Hyde Park, which is one of Derby's key community parks within their city. The property is unplatted and in Sedgwick County. There are no other zoning actions on this property to record. Public services, the proposed communications facility does not require municipal services. And there are no public utilities available on the site except for those potentially available in the housing development to the west from the city of Derby that serve those houses as well as the park. As mentioned before, the access to this site is from a 20-foot drive with a 12-foot gravel drive connection to the roundabout at James Street. Go to the next slide for land use map. The Community Investments Plan, which is our comprehensive plan out to 2035, identifies this area. You can see it's in the gray, which means it's in urban growth area for the city of Derby. Therefore, we kind of give it to them in terms of how they see fit of how their city is going to grow. We don't really have a lot of say in terms of how we feel that this is going to grow. That's based on them and their comprehensive plan. The Wireless Communications Plan, which was adopted in January of 2019, outlines guidelines for locating wireless communications facilities. Section 3 of this plan states that tall wireless communication facilities should be limited to heavy commercial and industrial areas and should decrease in height as the intensity of development decreases, with the shortest facilities being located in residential areas. Additionally, facilities should be located and designed in a manner that minimizes the visual obtrusiveness and negative aesthetic impacts on surrounding properties. Additionally, in Section 3, it talks about the silhouette of the tower should be minimized. So like a lattice type support structure, which is what this one is proposed to be, is not appropriate for urban growth areas, which is where the site is located. It also states that if a lattice type structure is approved within an urban growth area, that the antennas should be flush mounted to the support structure with cables attached to the main support arms rather than the girders. Overall, this tower is discouraged by the adopted plans and policies for Sedgwick County, mostly due to the height being almost double what would be permitted on this by administrative permit, as well as the type of structure that it is being a lattice structure, which is discouraged in urban growth areas. So based on that, the recommendation of planning staff is denial of this. And we base our denial off of the following findings. We've talked about the zoning and the uses and the character of the neighborhood being low density residential. It's also within an urban growth area for the city of Derby, which they have identified in their comprehensive plan to continue to be low residential uses in the future. The suitability of the subject property for the uses for which it has been restricted. Basically, what can it do with its current zoning? It is zoned RR rural residential. It has agricultural uses. Sites of this nature can have residential uses on sizable parcels down to 2 acres. So basically being low residential if it were to be maintained rural residential. It doesn't mean that a cell phone tower couldn't be placed on this property. However, it has to take into consideration the negative impacts of what future development would occur in this area based on its residential nature at the time. The next finding was the extent to which the removal of restrictions will detrimentally affect nearby properties. So if we do allow this to be built, if we take restrictions off the site and allow this to be built, what's going to be the detrimental impact? The request exceeds the height guidelines of the RR Rural Residential Zoning District by 115 feet. Approval of conditional use may have detrimental visual impacts on the surrounding properties, which is single-family residential and a community park within the city limits of Derby. The length of time for which the property has been vacant, it's not vacant, it just has agricultural land, so that one's not necessarily applicable in this case. Relative gain to the public health, safety, and welfare compared to the loss in value or hardship imposed on the applicant. Approval of the request would presumably mean economic benefit to the applicant, which is generally considered a gain to the public welfare. However, this gain must be considered in light of the possible negative impacts on the future properties around there, as well as the possible future development of the area, most likely being low-density, single-family residential. And denial would presumably represent a loss of economic opportunity for the applicant. The final one, finding is a conformance to the approved plans and policies. We already went over that of how it's identified as an urban growth area for the city of Derby. These types of towers are discouraged in urban growth areas, as well as the wireless communication master plan. Their guidelines say that the tallest towers like this one should be in heavy commercial industrial areas, and that as the intensity of the land use decreases, the height of the tower should also decrease as well. Therefore, it is not in compliance or conformance to our comprehensive plan or the wireless communications master plan. As with every denial recommendation that we present before you, we do provide you the alternate recommendation of approval with some conditions to follow. An important note to make is that if you were to approve the case today, the commission would have to adopt their own findings. You would have to go through what I went through, which are the golden factors, and adopt finding as to how you deem that it would be an appropriate use in the area, since we did not provide those findings for you. If it were to be approved, there's a list of conditions of approval. The first one being that the applicant shall obtain all the permits necessary to construct this facility within 50 days of the submittal of the building permit application, and it should also be erected in 1 year of approval of a conditional use, either by the planning commission or governing body. This is a new standard condition that is following recent changes to the legislation by the FCC's 150-day shot clock. For those of you who are not familiar, once an application is turned in, the governing body has 150 days to provide action on that. Otherwise, it's presumed approved. So there's a lot of leeway in terms of allowing wireless communication facilities to get constructed and to not let cities just let them sit on a shelf. So that's where that first point comes from. We can refer back to conditional use 2020-01, which is where it first showed up in terms of a standard condition of approval. Letter B, the lattice type structure should have antennas flush mounted to the structure with cables attached to the main support, as it said in the wireless communication master plan. Shall be silver or gray or a similar unobtrusive color and matte finish to minimize glare. The structure shall be no taller than 235 feet, plus an additional 5 feet for any lightning suppression equipment. The equipment compound shall be screened by a 6-foot solid screening fence. That can actually be updated since the revised site plan already includes that solid screening fence. It shall be developed in substantial conformance to the site plan. It has to comply with all FAA regulations, and then all federal, state, and local guidelines, and if the zoning administrator finds any violations, we can consider it null and void. I can go through some site pictures, and then I'll stand for questions. If you just want to kind of cycle through them, Paul, we won't have to take too much time on them. This is on the site looking north, so you'd be looking towards the agricultural land. There's, I think, that like a horse barn or something on the property just north of that. This is on the site looking east, pasture land with the hedgerow to the east and to the south. You'd be looking through the hedgerow into High Park in Derby. And then looking to the west, you can see that hedgerow with the backyards of those single-family homes. And then we have some pictures looking at the site. So I'm actually centered in the middle of that roundabout looking north on High Park Drive. Those are the single-family homes. Keep going. Looking a little bit to the northeast, basically looking through those trees would be where the tower would be located. Keep going. This is in High Park, looking the hedgerow to the left. That's kind of just right there is the one that separates this property from that park property. This is looking at the entrance into High Park from basically where that single family home is. This is on High Park looking north to where the tower would be located. And that is it. With that, I know that was a lot of information. I can stand for any questions you might have for staff.
Do we have any questions for Philip?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Joe Johnson. I'd just like to say that was a very thorough presentation. Thank you.
Hearing
Mr.
no
Chair, if
com-
I would like to acknowledge that Mr. Blick is here for this case.
Okay.
I just see him online.
Okay, good.
Can
Did
you hear
catch
me?
that? Okay. Yes,
This is Bob.
yes, Bob.
Yes, I have a question. So if this tower were to be moved, say, a half a mile or a mile on to the east, would that solve the problem with the community?
Not necessarily, because this type of a tower is not encouraged in residential area. And so even going a half mile to the east, you're still in residential zoning and still within the urban growth, most likely in the urban growth area of the city of Derby. I don't know the specifics on where their urban growth boundary ends, but most likely would be within the urban growth area for the city of Derby, which the wireless communication master plan still discourages towers of this height and structure type.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I find it interesting that this tower, if it had been just 120 feet in height, then it would have been okay to approve it administratively.
Yep, the guidelines would allow 120-foot monopole at this location.
Was that brought to the attention of the applicant, or do you know? And I guess
Again,
I'll
we have
ask the
to
applicant.
accept them by face value. We can't, one of those guidelines says we can't, as a commission or even staff, say, well, we think this is a better option for you, because we can't necessarily know or have the technical expertise to say a 120-foot tower will meet the needs of AT&T in this area.
All right.
I would also mention, I apologize, I failed to mention, there's a lot of detail. It was heard by the City of Derby Planning Commission last night. Anytime you're in an urban growth area, they can elect to hear it, and they did. They recommended denial of this 9-0. There were about 6 individuals who spoke at the meeting, most of them concerned about negative visual impacts, impacts to property values, and things of that nature. Is all fairly similar conversation going on. The City of Derby, which is who are allowed to speak on this because they own High Park, and since it directly abuts, they can act as public in terms of public comment. They comment on the negative impacts that it would have on the park as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Warren?
Just a question, in our package of stuff, we got resolution from the city, that was from the city council, not the planning commission? Or
That is from the City Council of Derby, yes. So not the Planning Commission, but since the city owns High Park, they have a resolution recommending that the Planning Commission, as well as potentially the Board of County Commission, to deny this case. In your packet of information, you also have a letter of support, which we don't often get. There are several letters of opposition as well. I tried to label them so we didn't get them confused.
So the city council has not denied it, they're just recommending that.
Right, their city council doesn't
They're
weigh on it.
requesting
Their
us to
planning-
deny.
Right, their
Okay.
planning commission weighs on it, and their recommendation goes on to the Board of County Commissioners.
Right.
Just like your recommendation goes on to the Board of County Commissioners. Their city
Right.
council, because they are the city of Derby who own it, their city council basically, as their opinion or it's not a recommendation to you, but since they own it, that is their way of communicating to you, we don't want this here. Because the Planning Commission of Derby recommended denial, this case will have to go to the Board of County Commissioners for final approval, and they will have to have a 4 or 5 majority vote in order to approve this case.
Thank you. Any other questions?
A question I have, this is Josh Blick, on the, I heard the thing that said solid 6-foot fence. On page 14, I noticed it said proposed 6-foot tall chain link fence on the little side view of it, but they're fine with the solid fence, correct?
Right, they did submit an updated site plan. I did have some communication with the applicant regarding their screening, and a new site plan was submitted early this week that replaces the site plan that was in the staff report. And it did indicate a solid screening fence.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, if we could have the agent or applicant, and if you could state your name, and you have 10 minutes. Oh, you're in the house.
I'm in the house, I apologize for that. I came to the wrong address. Good afternoon. My name is Glenn Clockey, and I am with Network Real Estate. We represent AT&T in their site acquisition efforts, and we represent them on this site. This particular location was picked for its location. I mean, AT&T will give us a search ring, and they're trying to cover a certain area. Their propagation needs to go out to a certain area. This particular site is actually designed to cover about a 6-mile radius, reaching into Derby, reaching up to, we have a site up in Palmer. We have a site in Rose Hill that they're trying to reach. There's a site down south in Mulvane they're trying to reach. So this is actually filling in a huge hole that AT&T currently has in the Derby area. We did look at lower elevations. We looked at lower towers, and from this location, because we tried to get it on the edge of, or kind of out of town so that it wouldn't be as aesthetically and pleasing, that the tower had to be a little taller. And once we started running our maps, and the height of the tower needed to be 235 feet to reach the surrounding sites that they were trying to cover. And so this one is you know, we thought we had it in a good area. We had a nice buffer around it, that a visual buffer with the trees, and we knew we were next to the subdivision area, but we kind of tucked it away from that, hoping that it wouldn't be as obtrusive as it is to the residents. So this particular site is to cover the city of Derby, pretty much running all the way to the other side of town, that we have a tower that we're trying to reach there to. So that is the design of the site. It is a 235-foot tower, and that's why it's that tall.
Okay. Do we have any questions for the applicant? Mr. Warren?
I'll take a stab at this because there are rules on what we can and can't ask. Obviously, the concern here is the visual effect of this and the height of it.
Right.
Is there an alternative to multiple towers at a lower height, or is this, I mean, I don't know, am I already off bounds by, I'm looking at their attorney here, make sure I'm
Mr.
not
Foster.
breaking the law, but I'm.
Mr. Foster's got the double X up there.
Yeah.
If you would,
Yeah,
please.
if you would,
Because I've kind of got the same questions about the height and the actual location of the tower itself.
Sure. Commissioner Warren, on your question, I'll go through I think there's a couple of the 18 exceptions that could apply to that. One of which is that you can't, when I say you, an authority, which would include ultimately the Board of County Commissioners. I think the Planning Commission fits into that too, since you're making a recommendation to them. You can't evaluate an application based on the availability of other potential locations for the placement of a wireless support structure or wireless facility, or the option to co-locate, or those types of things. So I would suggest steering away from that question. If the applicant wishes to volunteer that information, I believe he discussed more of their service need, but didn't really get into that question. So I hope that helps answer your question.
That helps. It's just difficulty, but I understand rules are rules, laws are laws, and so.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the commission for the agent? Hearing none, you will have an opportunity for a 2-minute rebuttal after we have comments from,
Okay. Thank you.
yes.
I had a, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, okay. Mr. Blick has a question for you.
So this is for the applicant. I appreciate the you looking outside the city and trying to get as close as possible. The question I'm going to try to borderline also with Mr. Warren. Is this your preferred location?
This is our preferred location. What I mentioned before is that when AT&T gives us what's a search ring, which is they give us a document that was actually one of your exhibits that says this is where we need a tower, and the reason we need a tower is it's based on their design criteria. So this design comes from AT&T's engineers. The search rings that we get nowadays, because these systems are so mature, they're very, very small. This particular search ring was a quarter mile round, which means we don't have a lot of latitude to move. So we looked for a long, long time at different candidates. We did scoot this one a little bit because we thought it would be better if we could just get it a little further out of town so it wouldn't be right in town, because they needed a tall tower. So that's pretty much where they tell us to go. And they actually pick, from the candidates that we give them, they actually pick the locations. We say, okay, these are 3 people, or these are 3 or 4 people who would be interested in doing a lease with us. And then they evaluate it and say, okay, this one works the best from a propagation point of view and from, what we're trying to cover point of view. So this is their location. And this is the one that works best. Scooting it around is, because, like I said before, the systems are very mature, and moving things, half a mile here, half a mile there makes a big difference in coverage on what they're trying to achieve. Years ago, you could move them, because the coverage just wasn't there already.
I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else have any questions for the agent from the commission? Hearing none. Is there anyone in Century 2 that would like to speak to this item?
There's no comment from Century 2.
Thank you. Are there any speakers virtually that would like to address this item? If there are, if you could please state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
The City of Derby would like to speak.
Yes, if you would, please.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Sexton, City Manager in Derby, and I have in the office here, I don't think you can quite see everybody, but the Mayor, Randy White, is here, and Councilmember Jack Heslop is here with me as well. Thank you for the opportunity. We certainly like to see good cell phone service in our city, and we have worked routinely for years with various providers and tower developers like this applicant today to get that coverage. And we realize there are things that we could be doing and should be doing to improve that. However, this is not the way. This proposal is to be twice as tall as our tallest water tower in town. We have 3 water towers. The tallest one's 135 feet tall. This is 235 feet tall. It is right beside homes. It is not right. As a Hyde Park, I love the fact that you all did these photos of Hyde Park. What the photos do not show you is it just shows the immediate area. It doesn't show you the next frame over, which is the softball fields. So whatever red strobe light blinking in the evening is going to be blinking right in those folks' faces. And I think this tower will really limit the use of this premier 230 some acre park, which gets a lot of use. From March to October, there's a softball tournament out there every weekend. Plus the soccer fields, which you do get a little bit of a view of. Of course, there's no kids out there playing right now in these photos, so you can't quite see it. But with a blinking light at them, I think it'll really limit the use of our park. And, you have the resolution that the City Council passed unanimously, as well as the recommendation from the Planning Commission from last night, another 9 people passing it unanimously. But the resolution, does mention the part about it being in our growth area. It is right on our city limit. It is right in these people's backyard. This is not the way. As noted earlier by your staff, this is definitely not within your requirements, certainly not within our comprehensive plan or our standards and requirements. And I think we heard one thing last night from one of the planning commissioners that gave us pause, And that was the indication that perhaps it would be difficult for some of these homeowners to sell their homes from the perspective of VA, maybe FHA loans and proximity. So we checked on that just this morning. I'm no expert in this field, but a mortgage lender that I was able to get a hold of did research that this morning, and the word came back right at 1:30 a minute ago that yes, on VA loan applications, which many of you know, a lot of folks from McConnell Air Force Base, veterans and active duty and reservists do live in Derby and routinely buy homes here, that it would be a problem for people getting VA loans for some of the homes that are very close to this tower. So I really hope that you all will consider, everyone wants better cell phone service. There are other ways to get it. The applicant just admitted that when he said he submitted 3 or 4 sites to AT&T. So there is some coverage in Derby now, which if this tower is going to cover all the way to across Derby, it looks to me like this is the most financially beneficial proposal for AT&T, but not for these neighbors in this community. So we would just appeal to you to consider our residents and our community and our park uses and deny this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? Yes, Mr. Foster.
I feel obligated to ask this question, but back when a lot of these cell towers started out, there was quite a bit of planning information available that talked about how do you work with these towers? How do you fit these into communities? And one of the methodologies was to come up with some sort of a structure. Perhaps it might be iconic or have some character to it that would truly be appropriate. And the reason I ask this question is you mentioned the water towers, and I'm thinking of the one on the east side of the community there. Is that one out in the rural area, and how tall is it? Do you know? Just the one
I'm sorry.
as you go east from Rock Road.
Okay, the 3 water towers in Derby are 110, 115, 135 feet tall. So the big tall one on Rock Road, right at the city limits, 135. There is a rural water 3 tower east of Derby. I couldn't tell you the height, but it's not this tall. It's not anywhere near as tall as this cellular tower. And I agree, sir. We have worked with companies over the years. I've been here 15 years. We routinely work with companies to put antenna on all of our water towers, on our football stadium that the school district owns. Anything we can do to help improve services. And some of you have been on commission a long time, know that we have not had conflicts about tower locations in Derby because we've been able to accommodate a lot of these requests. And I really think we could work with this developer if he would give us the chance and help find some other better alternatives.
Any other questions for this speaker? I have one, and in your resolution, it says here that that this would reduce the viability of future housing being built both north and east of this location. The property that's owned both north and east of this location, is it owned by the same person that's requesting the cell tower to be placed there?
The immediate acreage is that one owner, but if you just extend your map just a smidge further, there are several other owners, and certainly, let's see, north, east, south, east of Hyde Park, definitely multiple others.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the speaker?
Hearing none, thank you so much for your Oh, Mr. Blick.
So mostly what you're proposing is just because, or your opposition of it is just because of the height more than anything. Is that correct? You don't mind having multiple towers all over Derby. You just don't want the height of this one because it's so tall. Is that correct?
That is definitely the main thing, is the height. It is extraordinarily tall. This is the kind of tower you would see when you're out on a highway in the country and you look over in a field and you see these tall towers. This is huge. This is really not good at all. And so, yes, I think the immediate proximity to the homes is exacerbated by the height for sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else virtually that would like to address the commission on this item?
I would. My name is Mindy Grundeman. I live at 1136 North High Park Drive. My husband and I built this house, which is about 5 homes north of the roundabout here on High Park Drive. We built this home about 7 years ago, has been our dream home, and we love to be able to sit on the back porch and watch our kids play and speak with our neighbors across the fence and just have a relaxing atmosphere because of, you know, the trees, the fields that are behind us. If I can turn on this camera. Ooh, yeah, don't want to look at me. I'm going to give you a little bit of a visual here. So I am on my back porch right now. And here, I don't know if you guys can see this very well. Here is pretty much the location as to where this tower is going to be, which is going to be right behind these trees that you see. So those trees are maybe, I don't know, 80 feet tall. So right behind those trees is where that tower is going to go. And we're talking 235 feet. So, you know, we have a lot of neighbors here that this is their end home. This is where they're going to retire from. This is the last home they're ever going to have. Especially a couple of neighbors to the south of me who are going to get a lot more view of steel than I am. This is not what they signed up for. They wanted to have a relaxing atmosphere to go in the backyard and be able to play with their grandchildren and have a good time, and just the aesthetic of of having a very huge tower with, you know, hey, we got some little shrubs around it. It's not going to cut it for us. It's just, if I would have known that this was going to be here, I would have never built my house here. So hopefully you guys can kind of take us into consideration here, and we hope for the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Grundeman. Are there any questions for the speaker? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this issue? If there are, if you please state your name, address, and you would have 3 minutes. Anyone else? I'll give you an opportunity to unmute your microphone. Okay, it doesn't sound like we have any other speakers. If the agent or applicant would come back, you'll have 2 minutes to rebut anything you may have heard.
The only thing that I would like to clear up is that when I mentioned that we showed AT&T several locations, the locations we showed them were within their quarter-mile search area that they gave us to search. It wasn't like we went a mile this way or a mile that way. So that their criteria drives what area we look in. So, you know, we find parcels of property that we can build a tower on, that we can actually comply with setbacks, and then the property owner has to be willing to do a lease with us. So within that quarter-mile search area is where we found, I think, 2 possible candidates is really all we found. We had a third that dropped out. So that's my only clarification on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers, questions? Yes, Mr. Warren?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Yes, Mr. Clark, could you come back, please?
I'm trying to, in my mind, I'm trying to find a comparable. Are there any towers that are near this height and of this structure located in and around Wichita, Sedgwick County that are currently being used?
I could, I'm sure there are. I mean, there's towers everywhere. So, I mean, as far as this height, I'm sure from the early days, there's probably one or two within Wichita. I mean, I can look them up and you know, get a picture of them. But, yeah, with all the towers that are located across the country, yeah, you could find one this tall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the speaker? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bring it back to the commission for discussion and action. Mr. Warren?
I'll start off. We get towers all the time, and almost every tower ends up with a certain amount of opposition. And I have found that most of the arguments don't add up when we have towers. We've got towers all over the city. They're relatively innocuous. You don't even know they're there unless somebody brings it to your attention. This one doesn't fit that category. This one is a totally different animal of anything that I've ever remember seeing since I've been on the planning commission. Its proximity next to residential neighborhood and a height that we've got going up here is in excess of anything that we've seen. This would be one that I would have a hard time saying that it would not affect the value of the property. And I definitely believe that it would have an impact on future growth. This is in smack dab in the middle of Derby's growth pattern, going east and north of this location. So there's really just no way that I can go along with recommending approval of this height. You know, if this was a monopole and was in 125 to 150 foot range, that would be one thing. But this is outside of that circle of anything I could go for. So I will be in opposition of this application.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this? Any other commissioners? Yes.
Statement. So I'm the same as Commissioner Warren. I always like to see, looking outside, like what this applicant's doing is looking outside of residential neighborhoods, because we're starting to see a lot of them. They're having to get into residential neighborhoods with all the increase of cellular service inside the home and wireless needs and everything else, instead of having hundreds of towers throughout inside the neighborhood. So it was refreshing to see that an applicant was looking into outside of those neighborhoods, but at the same time, with the height and some of the variables, there's just so many of them that are out there that I would say that I couldn't support this also. And I'd entertain a motion for denial.
Okay, there's been a motion by Mr. Blick to deny the request. Do we have a second?
I will second it. Yeah, I will second it.
It's been moved by Mr. Blick, second by Mr. Florence, to deny. Any comments on the motion, Mr. Foster?
Yeah, I'd like to interject this into the motion, and that is, I think we've done a pretty good job of limiting ourselves to the golden factors, and I think we should go a little bit further in the motion in that we support staff's recommendation for the disapproval, and that they've done a good job of advising us on the state statute. And I think we need to commend the applicant as well. They've done a good job of presenting their information, and we have to rely upon their expertise is what this statute tells us. So I think that's been done well. But again, I think we need to go a step further in relative to supporting staff's recommendation as well as the recommendation from the city of Derby. And I would ask that we expand one of those golden factors to include the nature and character of the neighborhood input. because it's clearly been opposition, and I think that should be added to our golden factors. That would be my point of discussion.
Okay. Mr. Blick, do you have any concerns with adding what Mr. Foster included with regards to?
Commissioner Foster's statement on adding that onto the motion also as for personal recommendation.
Okay.
Hello?
Mr. Florence, are you okay with that? Hey, Bob?
Yes.
Mute your mic.
Yes, I'll be okay with that.
And Mr. Florence is okay too. So make sure that language is included in the motion, that would be appreciated. Any other questions or comments on the motion?
I guess the staff understand the amendment to the motion. Are you okay with what needs to be added? Or does it need to be restated? You got it? Okay.
All right, hearing none, everybody clear on the motion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. If we could have our next case, please.
Conditional use 2020-34, again, this is Philip Ziegenbergen, planning staff for the record. The applicant is requesting a conditional use for the placement of a 125-foot cell tower for AT&T on a property located approximately 1 block north of East 13th Street North and on the west side of North Santa Fe Avenue. It's located at 625 East 14th Street North. The site is zoned LI Limited Industrial and is immediately west of the elevated central rail line that goes through downtown Wichita. You can see it on the map there. The last bridge of that rail line is for 13th Street, and it's on its way down back to at grade, but it's still very elevated, as you'll see in the site photos when we get there. Per the Unified Zoning Code, this location is outside the area authorized for administrative approval of the wireless communication facilities. What that means is we have identified areas within the city limits of Wichita that if you request a cell tower within those designated locations, basically we can do it by administrative permit because they're mostly like commercial areas that are very conducive for cell towers. Section 3A2D of the Wireless Communication Master Plan limits the height of a tower in the LI district that can be approved by administrative permit to 150 feet. So you might be wondering why this one has to come for conditional use. And it is because the property directly west of this, across the alleyway, is zone TF3, two-family residential. So compatibility height restrictions come into play, and that is why it has to be done by conditional use. As I mentioned before, the proposed tower does not exceed those guidelines, but is within 500 feet, to be specifically, of the TF3 two-family residential. The compatibility height standards read as follows: that the wireless communication facility shall not exceed a height equal to the distance to the lot line of the property zone TF3. So what that means is if from the lease area to the property line of that TF3 zoning is 100 feet, you can have a 100-foot tower. The lot that's zone TF3 to the west across the alley of the subject site, it is plus or minus 120 feet. I used the scale. They had a distance from their lease area to the alleyway, I believe, or at least to the home that is directly west of there. That's in a B multifamily zoning. But I used the scale of their site plan to determine it was approximately 120 feet to the TF3 line. So therefore, it would only be allowed to be 120 feet tall. The proposed 125-foot tower exceeds these height compatibility standards, which is requiring conditional use approval. If you go to the next slide, sorry, I have the site plan there. You can see there's a site plan. They have a solid screening fence as well as landscaping. You can see there is a home directly west of that. That's in a B zoning district, which does not qualify for the compatibility standards. It's really measuring to the lot lines across the alley to the west. Can you zoom in one more time, or next slide, to the zoomed in site plan? The lease area for the wireless tower will be 50 feet by 80 feet with a 20-foot access easement to the north side. It will get access off of 14th Street. The applicant indicates that this tower will be a monopole structure. The 40-foot by 60-foot compound area will be enclosed by a solid screening 6-foot fence. In 2008, a conditional use for a wireless communication facility was approved for this site. The conditions of approval of the site include an 8-foot solid screening fence. Given the proposed tower's proximity to a single-family home directly to the west, this requirement will be used in this instant as well. So one of the recommendations or conditions of approval is that the solid screening fence be 8 feet and not 6 feet as proposed by the applicant. In addition to the screening fence, the plan shows the landscaping, which is in compliance with the Wichita landscape ordinance. It actually exceeds it. These would be considered ornamental trees, and you'd be only required to have 4 of them, and they'd only have to be planted on the west side, since that's the side that has the residential home, and they're actually looking to surround the entire property except for the access gate with the landscaping. So they actually are in excess of what the landscape ordinance would require. Next slide, please. There's the elevation of it. You can see the monopole structure. These do not have guy wires or anything. They're self-supporting structures. And based on the scale of this one versus the scale of the other one, you can see the considerable shorter height in this one relative to the trees and the structures that are located at the bottom. Next slide, please. The tower is meant to provide additional coverage to a 1/4 mile area near North Broadway and 12th Street, as you can see in the very faint yellow ring. It's kind of hard to see with the residential aerial image over there. Again, they provided a notarized statement that co-location was not an option, but just like the other case, we can't use that as an evaluation factor. Go to the next slide. I provided this information for this as well, just as a reminder of the evaluation things that we can't consider in this. I'm not going to take the time to go through them again since we went through them in detail the last time. If you go to the next slide, please. The character and the zoning of the area is a mixture of residential and industrial uses. Property to the north is zone limited industrial with industrial uses. Property to the east, again, is the elevated rail corridor, and if you go past that, it's industrial uses with the Cargill soybean vegetable oil refinery. Property to the south is zoned LI and is vacant, but further south there is a single-family dwelling in the LI district. Property immediately to the west is zoned B multifamily and is a single-family home, and further to the west parcel is zoned LI. But then you get past the alley and it's TF3 two-family with single-family dwellings. As I mentioned before, in 2008, the commission approved a conditional use, which was Con 2008-44 for a 150-foot wireless communication facility for this portion of the property. There are 2 reasons this conditional use is required for the current application. And number 1 is the original condition of that tower had to be erected within 1 year of approval. Obviously, that did not happen. And number 2, the lease areas and placement of the tower differ. So they're not the exact same footprint as they would have been, so they couldn't have just come back to try to re-up that conditional use, because there's actually different legal description of where this tower would be located. Even though it's on the same lots, still requires a new conditional use. Public services, the proposed wireless communication facility will not require any municipal services. However, there are water and sewer lines available on site. Access to the site is a 25-foot wide easement off of 14th Street. 14th Street is a gravel 2-way local street. It does get paved when you get to St. Francis. When you go east to St. Francis, it goes to gravel. North Santa Fe is also a gravel 2-way local street. St. Francis or 14th Street has sidewalks on both sides. Santa Fe has sidewalk on the west side of the street. Next slide, please, for land use. The community investments plan, which projects out to 2035, identifies the area of this site to be appropriate for new employment. This category encompasses areas that will likely be developed or redeveloped by 2035, and it constitutes centers of concentration of employment, primarily in manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, construction, research, technology, business services, and corporate offices. In general, the area is appropriate for commercial uses. This location is within the established central area, so we look at the Wichita Places for People plan, which is the infill strategy for the city of Wichita that was recently adopted. The subject site is within a subject area adjacent to a neighborhood hub at Broadway and 13th Street. The site is also located in an area identified as an area of opportunity. The plan identifies areas of opportunities as those areas generally exhibit economic challenges, a disconnected development pattern, and a lack of walkable places and facilities. These areas need strategic investment, both public and private, to assist in redefining and reinvigorating the area. Though the plan calls for strategic investment to redefine and reinvigorate the neighborhood, the location of the wireless communication facility would not be conducive place for such an investment. The site is on the very edge of the area of the disconnected development pattern. You can kind of see that with the wide variety of different types of zoning, where you have industrial uses next to residential uses, even low density residential uses. And so this site is actually very aptly suited for this type of commercial use because of being on the periphery of the neighborhood hub and adjacent to heavy industrial uses. So it's right on that edge. You know, you have Cargill right on the other side of the railroad track. You have the railroad track on it. So it's right on the edge of where that hub would be at 13th and Broadway. So it's not really in the middle where you really see a lot of the investment going. You would start more at the core over that neighborhood hub is and then work its way out. As we talked about with the previous case, the Wireless Communication Master Plan, which was adopted in 2019, outlines guidelines for the location of these facilities. As I mentioned before, the tallest tower should be located in heavy industrial areas, and they should get shorter as you get to residential areas. The proposed cell tower meets the general intent of this plan, and the conditional use as recommended meets the spirit and intent of supporting expansion of coverage for the industry within the community. So it is in conformance with our comprehensive plan, the Wichita Places for People plan, as well as the Wireless Communication Master Plan. If this did not have height compatibility issues, they could actually have come in for the 150-foot tower and done it administratively. Therefore, staff is recommending approval of this, subject to the following conditions: that all the requirements of Section 3D6 of the Unified Zoning Code be met. These are supplemental use regulations for wireless communication facilities. Again, as we talked about before, this kind of new added condition regarding obtaining all necessary permits within 50 days of the submittal of the building permit, and that the tower be erected in 1 year. The support structure should be a monopole design that is silver or gray or similar unobtrusive color with matte finish to minimize glare. Support structure shall be no taller than 125 feet plus additional 5 feet for lightning suppression equipment. The equipment compound shall be screened with an 8-foot solid screening fence. A site plan and elevation indicating the approved design should be submitted to the planning department within 60 days. So since we actually have a change in how that, they have to revise their site plan to show a 8-foot solid screening fence instead of a 6. It should be developed in conformance with the site plan. It should comply with all FAA regulations as well as other state and federal rules, and the zoning administrator, if they find any violations, can consider it null and void. The findings for this, zoning and character of the neighborhood, we already talked about the disconnected development pattern with industrial uses. And though there are nearby TF3 and single-family homes, an additional 5 feet above the 120-foot compatibility setback seems to be reasonable. The suitability for the subject property for which it has been restricted, the site is zone limited industrial and is vacant, so technically it could be a very much more intensive use by right without even having to come before the commission. Though there are a single-family home to the west, the solid screening and the landscape requirements should minimize some of the negative visual impacts directly next to that house to help screen the equipment from that property owner. Extent to which the removal of the restrictions will be detrimental to affect nearby properties. As I mentioned before, the additional 5 feet is really not that big of a deal, especially since in 2008 they approved a 150-foot tower, which is 25 feet taller than this one. And again, the landscaping and screening would minimize detrimental impacts. The subject property has been vacant for some time. Looking back over different aerial images, there used to be a single-family home on the property. My guess it was probably raised somewhere near 2008 when they wanted to erect the first tower that was approved for the site. Relative gain to public health, safety, and welfare versus the hardship imposed on the applicant. Approval of the request would mean economic gain for the applicant. Denial would presumably represent a loss of economic opportunity. To Mr. Foster's point, and something to add into the golden factors that just is not here, and we can definitely be better at putting it in the future. Regarding public opposition, I have not heard any phone calls, emails. I haven't heard anything from the District 6 City Council District as to anybody speaking to them about this case, so we haven't really heard anything. It's been very quiet related to opposition on this case. And the final one, we've already discussed the conformance to our policies and plans of how it conforms to all the policies and plans that we have. I can go through site pictures real quick with you. This is looking southwest at the site. You can see that it is vacant, and you can see the proximity, the single-family home that is to the west. Next slide. This is looking at the site kind of to the northwest. Again, that's the same single-family home, and the brick building is the industrial uses to the north of 14th Street. This is looking northeast. You can see the wall of the rail line that's there. Looking southeast, again, subject properties on the right. You can see Santa Fe Avenue there being gravel and the wall of the rail line going towards 13th Street. This is looking west along 14th Street towards St. Francis. You can see the homes on St. Francis there. Next slide. This is at St. Francis and 14th. The property directly to my left is actually vacant. There's no houses on there. You can see the single-family home that'll be right next to the tower in relation to the Cargill facility on the other side of the rail line. Next slide. This is looking at the corner of St. Francis and 14th Street, looking to the southeast. You can see the single-family homes. Those are the ones that the compatibility setbacks come into play with. I think that is it. This will go to the District Advisory Board 6 on this coming Monday, so they have not rendered any recommendation on it yet. If this case is not, what's the word I'm looking for? I just lied. It's not petitioned, but I just have a total blank protest. Thank you. If it is not protested in the protest period following, the 2 weeks following this meeting through December 17th, it will not have to go to City Council. Conditional uses, if they are not protested, the Planning Commission's decision is final. If it is protested, then it will go to City Council for final action. I can stand for any staff questions.
Any questions for staff? Yes, Ms. Fox.
Does a 125-foot tower have to have the flashing red lights at the top all the time?
I believe they are required, really probably more from the FAA standpoint. And I know there's a part of one of our supplemental use regulations within our zoning code requires light indicators on top.
And about 4 slides from the end, it looked like there was something pretty high right across. Are there already red lights flashing in that area?
I am unaware if Cargill has red lights flashing on top of their buildings or not.
Right, that view.
Right. I'm unaware if that building has light indicators on top of it. I actually have not been on that neighborhood at night.
Because to me, that's the most obtrusive part of a tower in a residential area are the flashing lights through the night.
Yeah, I know I've read it in our zoning code that those lights are required, and I believe the FAA would probably require them as well.
Mr. Warren?
I got a question. From that picture right there, if you put a tower up there on the railroad, would they measure from the ground to the next to the tracks, or would they measure down to the bottom of where the road is?
Well, I would assume they'd probably do from the road, because that's truly how tall it is relative to since the other properties are at grade, and if you were to put it on top of the railroad, it would be, if the railroad's 20 feet tall and you put a 125-foot tower, it's a 145-foot tower. I mean, that's kind of neither here nor there with the case, because the side is actually at grade.
Right.
Nice. Any other questions for staff? Hearing none, if we could have the agent or applicant, again, state your name and address for the record, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you again. My name is Glenn Clockey, and my address is 5055 Highway N, St. Charles, Missouri. So this particular location, again, was a very, very small search ring. Again, they're about a quarter mile around. We did look at the permitted uses in Wichita County, which is always nice if you can come into, the city of Wichita, if you can come into a city and they say, okay, here's these parcels that you're permitted by right, we gravitate to them immediately. Worked with the engineers, the locations just didn't work for their design criteria, what they were trying to cover. So then we started looking at different locations for the search ring that they had given us. Came across this one. It was in a pretty highly industrial area. We thought it would be a good fit. It wasn't going to be a real tall tower, and was able to secure a lease with this property owner. So we knew there was something had happened on that parcel in the past with another tower. The property owner had mentioned it. Don't know why that didn't happen. I'm not really sure. I don't know if the carrier just moved somewhere else or not. So to answer your question, as far as lighting of a tower, unless the FAA requires us to light a tower, any tower over 200 feet has to be lit by, just because it's over 200 feet. Anything below that, if the FAA requires it, it'll be lit. If it doesn't require it, it will not be lit. There won't be a light on it. So there are a lot of shorter towers all over the United States that are not lit. Unless you're really close to an airport, and we run FAA studies on all of our towers. So if they tell us, yeah, you got to put a light on it, we will. Otherwise, it is not lit. So, and as far as the fencing, we'll revise our drawings to go up to the 8 feet, and and the landscaping around it. So we just thought this was a good fit. We had a nice buffer to the west with this wall that it wasn't going to be anybody over there. So that was why this particular location was picked, and basically because AT&T, it worked for their coverage objectives. So.
Thank you.
For questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the agent? Yes, Mr. Foster and then Mr. Hartman.
Yeah, years ago, when we were advised by the experts on these towers, is that we didn't have to worry about fall height. And that is the idea that if something does go wrong or it breaks, that it's not going to go the full distance of its height. Can you explain that a little bit further?
So the first thing that I will say about communication towers is that they're built much sturdier than the average building. They're built to withstand, particularly in this area, because the tornadoes and things like that. They're built to withstand 120-mile-an-hour winds with a half-inch radial ice on it. If they do, let's say something hits it, earthquake or whatever, the monopole designs are designed to kind of collapse in on themselves. So it's not like a tree that is just going to fall over. They're designed to collapse in on themselves. Now, I don't know, in the real world, I have never seen a tower go down. I've been doing this for 25 years. The only one I saw go down was one that we were taking down. So, I've seen towers that have been hit by hurricanes. It's not to say that it hasn't happened, but I've seen towers that have been through tornadoes and hurricanes, and they'll bend, but I've never really seen one get torn down. We actually had one where I live in St. Louis. It was a monopole similar to this. I don't know if it was the same height, but it was in a direct path of a tornado that went through and actually hit our airport about 10 years ago and didn't budge the tower. I was shocked. It twisted a couple antennas, but the tower didn't move. So, and you could see the path of destruction that went right through this tower. So yeah, if there's, let's say there's an earthquake or something underneath it and it shakes the foundation and things are collapsing, these are somewhat designed to collapse in on themselves, yes.
Just one final question, and you mentioned the fencing thing, so you're comfortable and in agreement with the staff comments?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank
you.
We'll make that 8 feet.
Yes, Mr. Hartman?
He answered my question.
Well, there you go.
Mr. Blick.
And then, Mr. Blick, did you have a question?
Actually, he answered my question also, but it did say in the site plan that you were going to put up a 6-foot tall Simtech composite fence. Are you still going to keep that fence to 8 foot on the same type? Because I know that's a very expensive fence, composite fence. So I didn't know if you're going to go to that or standard wood.
It'll be Simtech. It'll be 8 foot Simtech. Yeah. We'll just change the drawings.
Appreciate.
I'm sorry?
I said I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, that won't be a problem.
Okay, any other questions from the commission for the agent? Hearing none, thank you, and stand by. You'll have
Thank you.
a couple minutes for rebuttal if need be. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item, maybe at Century 2?
No comment from Century 2.
And it appears as though we probably don't have anybody virtually that would like to address this item. I think I recognize every name on there. So we will not need rebuttal. We'll bring this back to the commission for discussion and action.
I'll move for approval, subject to staff comments.
Second?
It was moved by Mr. Joe Johnson and seconded by Mr. Warren to approve per staff comments. Any questions or discussion?
I'm the one that.
Oh, you made the motion?
I made the motion. I don't know if Joe made it too. I couldn't hear.
No, I did, okay, yeah, Mr. Hartman made the motion. I think maybe from now on, if the person who makes the motion identifies himself, 'cause it's, sometimes this old man's hearing isn't all that great, especially at home. So we've got a motion on the floor by Mr. Hartman, second by Mr. Warren, to approve this item. Any other question? Yes, Ms. Fox.
This is definitely a low-income residential area, and these folks have a very difficult time coming to hearings and presenting information. Can somebody clarify how the neighborhood is informed? Is it only property owners? Because a number of these properties are rentals also.
The letters that are mailed out, so the list that is produced by the title company is to property owners. So yes, rentals, it does not go, if it is a rental, it goes to the landlord. However, we do notify the neighborhood associations. And so with this being, I think it's within Midtown, which is a fairly active neighborhood association. The neighborhood association is made aware. And we kind of leave it up to them to disseminate information amongst the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Foster.
And Philip, would that include the sign?
Yes, I failed to mention, we do have the development application signs, which this site being on a corner, you have one sign per street right of way. So there was a sign facing 14th and a sign facing Santa Fe. So anybody driving by the area had the opportunity to call our number in, be notified of what was going on at this location.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. We are adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for you.
Too late, we're adjourned. Oh. Yeah.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
See, okay, now you can ask your question.
Huh?
You go ahead.
Could this tower have been built in the Derby site, on the Derby site? By right?
Yes, that tower, we
Well, yes and
denied.
no. This one, the Derby site being an RR residential would have had to have been 120 feet, and this one was requested at 125. So
All
I think
thank
it would
you.
still have to do a conditional use application because it exceeded the 120 foot guideline from the wireless communication master plan.
Got it. Thank you, sir.